Good evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. I'm Madhavdas G. Ladies and gentlemen, it's day 5 of the Middle East war, and unfortunately, the flames of the war have reached India's doorstep. The spotlight is on Iranian warship Iris Dana, which was invited by India for a joint naval exercise and then struck down by America off the coast of Sri Lanka on its way back. The big question here, is Trump trying to drag India into this war? At least 87 people have been reportedly killed, and a search is still on for the others who are still missing. In fact, the Eastern Naval Command has put out a post from February 17 saying that Indian Navy welcomes Iris Dana of the Iranian Navy on her arrival at Visakhapatnam, reflecting long-standing cultural links. Today, on her journey back to Iran, America's torpedo sent her to a silent death. This was confirmed by the U.S. Secretary of War. Listen in.
An American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win. Also, yesterday, the leader of the unit who attempted to assassinate President Trump has been hunted down and killed. Iran tried to kill President Trump, and President Trump got the last laugh.
Let's also try and understand why an attack in the Indian Ocean region matters for us. The first reason is that it indicates heavy presence of the US Navy in the Indian Ocean. The second reason is that the US Indo-Pacific Command could be involved very clearly in this war, and this could trigger US logistics exchange MOU with India, because LEMUA is something that has already been signed. The US may rely on Indian facilities for refueling and repair in the future, and Pakistan already hinting at entering the Middle East war. But viewers, this is just one of the several targets today, as Iran and America continue to launch missiles towards critical infrastructure. The Indian Ocean submarine attack, of course, we've seen near Sri Lanka, but there's also the Iran's Natanz nuclear facility, which has been struck. In Qatar, Iranian missiles intercepted, multiple explosions were heard there. In Saudi Arabia, drones struck the US embassy in Riyadh. In UAE, there was a drone strike near the US consulate in Dubai. And there's breaking news coming in at the moment. The United Kingdom has not ruled out joining future strikes on Iranian missile sites as the US prepares to deploy heavy bombers to UK-linked bases. Officials say that Iran may have several days of missiles left, while Western forces are increasing attacks on the launch sites in Iran. More breaking news coming in at the moment. In fact, it's the Qatar Prime Minister who's held a call with Iran's Foreign Minister Arakchi, urges immediate halt to the attacks. Let's go across to Mayank, who's joining us for more on this. Mayank, it's very clear that on the one hand, while the diplomatic efforts are underway, the Qatar PM speaking to the Foreign Minister of Iran, but at the same time, it's very clear that Western forces, including UK, are going to come in. They're going to be a force multiplier. Their bases are going to be used to help the US to deploy these heavy bombers. And these heavy bombers are very important because a lot of the manufacturing and a lot of the arsenal, we are told, is in underground facilities and in the tunnel networks.
Even if it sounds repetitive, we need to understand that the missile program of Iran had to be factored whenever the war started. And I think it is also, now the people have realized that it was flourishing. And the way they have, Iran has been able to indigenously develop its military industrial complex, it is now causing all the kind of problems. So if we saw last time also, the ambit of the entire attacks and support attacks maybe, or defensive attacks, which is being increased now, and that way the UK is also now hinting that they'll be joining this entire campaign. It is a part of it actually. Now the missiles have been able to hit, the war zone has expanded, and as you said, the Prime Minister of Qatar himself is trying to diplomatically talk to people to bring down the entire campaign, which is started from Iran side as a as a
all right, we'll have to look
part
at the
of
fallout
campaign.
of all of this. In fact, Mayank, thanks for getting us that update. Let's quickly open this up and take it across to our guest. With us is Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, who's of course a retired Commander-in-Chief of the Western Naval Command and Chief of Integrated Defence Staff. With us also is Sushant Sareen, of course, is a Senior Fellow of ORF. Joining us also at the moment is Arsh Azizi, author and historian at Yale University. With us also is Angie Wong, Miami GOP Committee Woman, and Jeremy Zakharov is a former Vice Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and former Israel Ambassador to Germany. I'd like to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. And Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, how does this change things for India? In the larger equation, India has tried to maintain distance and demand de-escalation. We've not been in any way directly involved in any aspect of the war. But one, the fact that this has happened following a military exercise in Visakhapatnam, it was refueling from Kerala and then it was headed out of Indian waters when this has happened. Point number one. And point number two, there's a lot of talk about whether US is now going to press for logistics cooperation, and there's already the LEMOA agreement that we've signed. Is that a possibility of being opened now?
Well, thank you for that's a very relevant question and more difficult to answer. But let me take an attempt. First of all, it has happened in international waters, so there is no legal binding on India, and India can't be answerable to any of these. But the bigger point is it is very close at home. It's very close, and it is within the EZ of Sri Lanka, not very far from our own waters. So if it is coming to our own waters, then it would have been prudent on the part of the US, which they normally do, being part of our Malabar, part of our 2+2, part of our Quad, that at least share that your submarine will be operating in this area, nuclear submarine. Normally they do. So that's a bit of surprise. I don't know why they didn't do it. And I think at some level they must, tell the US Navy that, this is one thing that they should have done. We are your partner. We are not your enemy, and we are not going to reveal it to anybody. So having said that, LEMOA, very unlikely, because mind you, the LEMOA is conditional to many things. And one of the conditions is not Iran, right? And second point is that there also the permission to use is totally case by case, and it will depend on the government of the day as to what do they feel about it. Right. If there's some friendly country, like in this case, Iran is also happens to be our friend. In many cases, civilizational friend as they call it. So, even if they reject, if they say, sorry, we have some difficulty, diplomatic difficulty, it will be well within the, the rule books of the LEMOA.
Right.
So these are broadly what I have to say.
Okay. Let me quickly bring in fact, some of our other panelists. And Angie Wong, I'd like you to come in on this because, US and India have very close ties. And of course, apart from, of course, the hiccups surrounding the tariffs, so on and so forth, it's a relationship that's been in the make for 2.5 decades. But the question that many would have here in India, and we have Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, who has seen the naval operations on the highest level. Normally, we would expect some kind of an intimation from the United States because these are waters very close to India. Who knows, which ships would have been traversing those areas at that point of time, and what if there was some kind of misfire or some kind of incident where it did not accurately, pinpoint and get the target it had intended.
Yes, and we here in the U.S., we do consider India a very close ally and a friend, but we're also wondering where you stand on this war. So far, India has been very silent as to where India stands. Is it for the U.S.? Is it for Israel? Is it for the other side? And that's fine. I know that Modi has come out to say that he wants diplomacy first. We all want diplomacy first, but it is very clear with the Iranian regime, they're not willing to have serious talks with anybody about de-escalating and also about removing their nuclear programs. So why hasn't India committed to this? And maybe that's what this circumstance that we're facing, that we're talking about today, that's where we stand right now. Why haven't you committed military to this operation?
No, but Angie Wong, this is a very, very curious question because India in the past has taken a position where we talk to Russia and we talk to Ukraine. Why should we necessarily take a stand on a war that we're not directly involved in? Is the US and Israel
Can I comment on this?
Not anybody else.
Can I comment on this?
Yeah, one by one, please. Just one by one. I want Angie to answer the question because the question is for the information not coming from the US to Indian authorities, or at least the apparent lack of it from what's been reported.
Right. And what we're reporting here in the U.S. is very much that question. Where does India stand in all of this conflict? And again, we're not trying to draw you in, but those are the questions being asked by the media circles here. We know that Prime Minister Modi met with Benjamin Netanyahu just 2 weeks ago in regards to trade and perhaps defense. So was there something struck? Was there a deal made then? Were there back channeling back then where maybe perhaps Bibi Netanyahu had informed India that this operation was going to take place, to give his good neighbors a heads up on what this is happening. So a lot of it is speculation, of course, but the timing of everything seems to flow in that direction. At some point, India is going to have to decide whether or not you're going to join.
No, India will decide when it will decide. Certainly will not listen to dictation coming in from anybody. And let me bring in Sushant Sareen on that note. Sushant Sareen, I find it a bit curious. Of course, everyone wants to know India's stand. That's all acceptable. But why should India necessarily put out its stand in a situation where it has, complicated ties with both sides, number one? And number two, can that be a ruse or an excuse for not informing India in advance when there is this kind of military action happening very close to India's coast? What is your assessment, Sushant? Please unmute yourself and speak.
I said, I'm sitting in the company of Admiral Sinha, so maybe it's a little presumptuous of me what I'm going to say. See, my point is that, yes, under normal circumstances, when there is peace, there are no hostilities, perhaps the Americans would inform, because these are two friendly navies, they would keep us in the loop on, any movement near our coast. But this is not a peaceful time. This hostilities have already broken out. So maybe that was one of the reasons why the Americans did not necessarily tell us. One. Second, assuming that they had told us, if, for example, they had informed us, what would we have done about it? We could not have done anything about it. If we had, for example, told the Iranians that, listen, there is this sub lurking around and it's going to be hunting you down, so watch out. That would not have been proper. And if we had kept quiet, and it's good that if the Americans have not told us, because now at least we don't have, our hands covered with whatever has happened. We can wash our hands of whatever has happened. Because yes, it might be in the Sri Lankan EEZ, but that EEZ is international waters. It's not territorial waters of Sri Lanka. So I think from that point of view, we don't have any responsibility. And I was just reading something someone had written on Twitter. And he said that, look, there was 70 odd ships which had come for this exercise. Is it in this case that we have to escort each one of those back home? Now, the Iranian ship knew that hostilities have broken out. They should have, and the Americans had very clearly declared that the Iranian Navy is in the crosshairs. They will be down the Iranian Navy. This ship should have been it should have been prepared for some kind of an action against it, or it should have sought refuge in an Indian port. It did neither.
Okay.
So how our responsibility? After all, a naval ship, a warship, is supposed to have the necessary wherewithal to try and track submarines.
Okay.
If the ship is not doing it, it's not on my head. I don't know why, suddenly everybody's getting all excited.
Let me bring in the panelist who's representing the Iranian point of view on this. Arsh Azizi, would you like to come in on this? Because if there is a war going on, we know that the naval targets of Iran have, been targeted. The naval assets of Iran have been targeted by the US, and in particular over the last few days. So then it is incumbent on the Iranian Navy to have ensured security, or not having brought it in perhaps the international waters where it could have been at the receiving end of such an attack. Respond to Sushant.
Iran has, a lot of vulnerabilities in its navies. The reality is that now it's waging an all-out war. It could hardly complain about being targeted when itself is targeting so many countries in the region already, almost half a dozen countries. It's even hit Cyprus. So it's going all around, and the opponents of Iran would say, well, what was the ships doing in the Indian Ocean? Although I have to say, Iran has tried to project power in the Indian Ocean for decades under the Shah already in the 1970s. It would do that. But also about the possibilities of, from the Iranian side, I wanted to point out, to the other guests, this question of, will India join militarily against Iran is kind of a strange conception. India and Iran have very good ties over decades. India is, of course, known for its non-aligned politics. Yes, it has good ties with the U.S., good ties with Israel, but it's a non-aligned country, it's a founder non-aligned movement. So it's never going to enter into a military conflict with Iran. In a very sort of serious military conflict with Iran, considering that the two countries, as I said, have these very important ties. Because of this, for example, even in Islamic Republic, despite being a Islamist country, on the Kashmir issue, for example, has never really come to support Kashmiri insurgents against India because it values the ties that it has with New Delhi.
Right.
So Tehran-New Delhi ties are very strong, and I don't think we can see anything like that. India could play a mediatory role, in fact. One could hope at some point.
Well, India has sought de-escalation, and that's the official stand that the government has formally taken as far as this crisis is concerned. But let me bring in Jeremy Issacharoff. Jeremy Issacharoff, you wanted to come in on this discussion. Of course, it's a fact that the manner in which it's all played out, it has moved from US, Israel to Iran. Iran has then attacked many countries in the Middle East, and now, of course, they are all supporting the action on Iran. But the point is, for a country like India, which has huge stakes in the Middle East, does not want to be seen taking sides because it has about a crore Indians, about 10 million Indians who are actually living across the Middle East, including in Iran. So it's very difficult for India to pick a side at this point of time. Is that something that is very difficult for people to understand globally?
Well, first of all, we have a lot of respect for our relationship with India as it was presented in the Prime Minister Modi's visit to Jerusalem just a few days ago, prior to this attack. We have a very great deal of respect for the strategic partnership that we've both built together. But we also understand fully Indian position regarding Iran, and their friendship towards Israel doesn't reflect on how they relate to Iran. That's an issue for India to decide. And I think it's important to understand that we don't have expectations of India being involved in this war. And this is something that in many ways is not just started last Saturday, but Iran has already been attacking Israel since the early 90s. I remember very recently, 2 days ago, we commemorated the attack on our embassy in Buenos Aires that was initiated by the Iranians. So this is something that has gone on for a long time. Now, I just want to chime in on a couple of the points. I mean, the Americans said from the very beginning that they were going to target military targets, including the Iranian Navy. I think it's important that there's a lot of sensitivity regarding the freedom of navigation in the Hormuz Straits. And so I would imagine the Americans, and I'm not speaking for them, but they are concerned about what the Iranian Navy could do and how that would affect the passage of ships in the Hormuz Straits, and how that will also affect global oil prices, which I've seen, just checked, have gone up over $80 a barrel for Brent and crude.
That's right.
So I think there's a lot of issues here, but I think one last point I would imagine that India, if they have a concern about this ship, the sinking of this ship off the Indian coast, that they would share it with the Americans.
Sure.
And that the Americans will probably be more sensitive to this issue in not expanding this conflict even more.
Well, interesting that India hasn't put out an official statement at the moment is what I understand. But Sushant, yes, you wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, on two things. Sometimes diplomacy is not necessarily done in public. It can be done quietly, and as the ambassador very correctly has said, even if we have some issues, we can talk to the Americans, we can talk to other partners, and talk to them quietly. Every time you don't have to do, chest thumping like a chimpanzee because you do grandstanding. Secondly, it's very rich of the lady from the United States to ask us where we stand. I can turn that question around and ask her, where were you standing when Op Sindoor was taking place between India and Pakistan? Your president has been, calling the Pakistanis his favorite friends and best friends forever. So I can turn around and ask you the same question. And if you owe no obligation to me, I owe no obligation to you. And secondly, Madhav, different countries have different priorities and different relationships with other countries. And it's not necessary. So let me give you an example. The Israelis, for example, have a very good relationship, close relationship, cooperative one with Azerbaijan, right? But Azerbaijan is openly hostile towards India. It's almost like an enemy country, same as Turkey. Do we hold it against Israel or should I expect it from Israel that, listen, you need to break off with Azerbaijan and in return I will break off from Iran? How does that work? It doesn't work, right?
Right.
Israel has its own compulsions and its own necessities for having a close relationship with Azerbaijan. I can't begrudge them that. And similarly, I don't think they will begrudge me my relationship with Iran, especially if that does not impinge on Israel's own national interest or security interest. And we have tried to keep all of that separate. It's the same thing with Americans. So
let Angie Wong answer that. I think that's a very pertinent question. Yeah.
What's the question?
This entitlement which they have that I must be always at their service, but they can do whatever the hell they want to do. I'm sorry, that's not the way the real world works.
That's exactly the question that I posed earlier as well. Angie Wong, what about the same question if it's turned around, that when it comes to Pakistan, you're whining and dining the military dictator over there, Asif Munir. How should India take that then? Should we be offended by that? That's not how diplomacy works.
No, the framing of the original question was that this happened in waters near India. So we are wondering if it's near your borders, what you're going to do about it. This is not about all these other issues, internal issues between India and Pakistan. That has nothing to do with this conversation whatsoever. You're curious whether or not
that's just a response to your framing that India has to pick a side between US, Israel or Iran. India doesn't have to. That is the first point. And second point, why should Indians not be outraged? Because you've opened up the theater of war, you've shifted it from the Middle East and you've plonked it right in the Indian Ocean, which is putting us in harm's way, possibly.
Well, again, you don't have to get involved. We're not asking you to be involved. But we are.
What if there's a counterstrike by Iran in the region tomorrow? Can you guarantee there won't be one?
What does that have to do with this conversation?
That's exactly the point. There's been a submarine torpedo that has struck an Iranian ship in the Indian Ocean. How do we know Iran won't respond in India's vicinity?
Your own people. How is the Indian military going to be protecting its own people? Will you be getting involved in this? And if you do, obviously it's to protect your own sovereignty. But will you join forces with the U.S.? Will you join forces with Israel? Will you go against Iran? We have these questions. All of this is being framed from yesterday's press conference at the White House with Donald Trump, where he blasted Spain and the UK for not joining forces with the US. So now we're wondering who our allies are in the region.
Well, Spain actually kicked out the US. That's another level of conversation. I think that's a totally different context. That's not comparable at all. But let me bring in Vice Admiral Sinha on this. Vice Admiral Sinha, the point is very simple. The point is they're saying, why are you worried? Your military is there. You can take care of your sovereignty. Sure, we can. But why should India get dragged into a war that hasn't, either started or at the moment even wants to be a part of in any way?
No, let me do one fundamental correction. The Indian government does not have military alliance with any country. So please do not expect that militarily you will get supported. This is not correct. The Quad is a completely non-military. Malabar is an exercise which is for a specific purpose and it is worked in a very different grading, number one. Secondly, like Sushant rightly said, even if you knew, what would you do? At least we will caution our own ships and submarines to keep clear of that area. Because we keep operating in that area left, right, and center. So basically, not to go and tell Iran as to what the Americans are doing, but at least make sure that our own ships are, our trade comes from there. A lot of oil is actually offloaded into Visakhapatnam and Madras. We would have told them, okay, take a longer route, you come tomorrow. We would tell them why. We tell them take a longer route, report at so-and-so point. These diversions keep happening. We do it every day. The Western Command is a Delhi affair. So that is why, to expect that we should tell everything, where are we standing? As Sushant said, we would also like to know where were you standing at that time. There is no military alliance, there is no military commitment for anything between India and US.
Right.
For that matter, with any country.
Right.
So this is what I'll say.
And Vice Admiral Sinha, I'd also like to ask you a simple question. What should India's position be? Thus far, India has not officially spelled out its stance on this incident. How do you see India responding to this? Is silence and back-channel diplomacy the best way forward? Or should India make a statement very specifically about being part or not being part of the war and what's happened in its vicinity?
No, India has made a statement that, please bring a halt and, have peace, start talking. And that is the official stand. A lot of people said, why did India not, start expressing sorrow because of Ayatollah's death? Well, Ayatollah was not occupying any official position. He was neither a president nor a prime minister. He was the spiritual head. And therefore, for an official statement to be issued from here, I think it's a good thing that they have not made any statement.
Yeah.
So and in fact, I would say that it's a very practical thing to do.
Right.
And here also, back-channel diplomacy, as you rightly said, Madhavdas, back-channel diplomacy in these kind of things where you can actually embarrass and partner.
Right.
Not an ally, but a partner and a good friend is better to do a lot of back-channel things. And like Sushant rightly said, every diplomatic stuff need not be put in the
public domain. Right.
Newshour channel.
All right. Let me bring that. Let me bring in Jeremy Zakharov on this, and I also want to bring in Arsh Azizi because Jeremy, there's a sense that the response of Iran has overwhelmed US and Israel. Of course, you're putting up a fight, you're attacking, you've dominated the airspace, so on and so forth. There's a lot that's going on the side of the US and Israel as well in terms of their achievements. But, when attacks like these happen, because it's a ship that we're also told was not just returning from India, but also was not, prepped for a fight or war as such. But, it raises the question about whether the US is trying to, put out the image of the successes that it has, been able to bring out in this war after a few setbacks that we saw, particularly day before yesterday, where 3 F-15s, etc., were lost, and even the 5th Fleet in Bahrain was attacked.
Well, I think, look, we're not looking to expand this war, and if anything, we're looking to debilitate as much as possible the missile threat from Iran, which has been increasing in recent months since the June war. And we don't see any evidence that they have abandoned their nuclear program. And it's quite possible that they continue to look towards the development of their nuclear capabilities. And obviously, the riots in Iran over the last few months also created this crisis, the movement of American troops towards the area.
Right.
So this is the situation. Now, we're not looking to expand this. If anything, the Iranians have attacked, I think, 7 or 8 Arab countries. There was a missile today that went over Iraq and Syria and was intercepted by NATO because it was heading towards Turkey. So it's clear that the Iranians are not only expanding this war, but they're also demonstrating their strategic weakness and also the fact that they are really a threat to the entire area, not just to Israel. And please allow me to tell you, we just had an alarm of another attack.
All right, no, please be safe.
Overwhelmed.
I won't press you to be. I won't press you to be on air. Please take care of your safety. I think that's very important, Jeremy. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us at this moment of crisis. But the question still remains, and Arsh, I'd like you to answer that. Is it Iran that is actually trying to expand the scope and the theater of war in this particular case? Because the former Israel ambassador to Germany certainly believes so. Answer his question.
It's clear that Iran is trying to expand the conflict and did it from day one. Iran had warned that any attack will regionalize the conflict, so to speak. And it did it from the day one. It attacked very vastly. It attacked Qatar, it attacked Bahrain, it attacked, so many other countries. It also can have other cards up its sleeve, like trying to foment uprisings in Bahrain, which is, Shia majority. Historically, Iran has had some ties there. So it's certainly doing that, and it is doing that as a mechanism of hoping to get these Arab countries, many of whom have good relationship with President Trump. President Trump does listen to many of them. I guess they're trying to do that so that the cost of the war will be on the entire region, and there would be pressure on the other side to stop it at some point.
All right, Angie Wong, Jeremy Zakharov, Sushant Sareen, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, and Arsh Azizi. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us on this extremely crucial and in many ways alarming development for us here in India. At the moment, of course, a lot of concerns about the implications of this, and perhaps in days to come, we'll know what really has transpired and really if there are any further implications as far as India and the larger Indian Ocean region is concerned. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.